Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Vivian Schiller. I'm Executive Director of Aspen Digital, a program of the Aspen Institute. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C., but have sister organizations all over the world. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit, tens of millions of people around the world shifted to work from home. Those working in the public sector faced a unique set of challenges, as they had to adjust to remote work while at the same time trying to keep up with a massive spike in demand from their constituents. Their organizations had to adapt and adapt fast, accelerating technology systems in a matter of weeks, what should have been years worth of change. Even as the world now begins to open up, there is no reason to believe we will return to normal anytime soon, or what normal even means. Until a vaccine becomes widely available, remote first will be the default. But what does it mean to be remote first when you're a public sector organization? That's what we're here to talk about today. I'll be joined by thinkers and doers in this field to discuss how they are working firsthand in countries all over the world to build scalable and reliable technology systems. Before we get started, I want to thank AWS Institute for hosting this session and for bringing us our fantastic speakers today who represent AWS customers and government leaders. Our speakers are Steve Jones, CTO and Global Solutions Director for Insights and Data at Capgemini. In that capacity, he works with business and IT leaders to align their data with governance and business value. We're also joined by Dr. Tariq Shawki, Minister of Education and advisor to the President of Egypt. He is a leader in the Arab region in modernizing university education in basic and engineering sciences and deeply involved in these issues at a global level. We're also joined by Ralph Pogiman. He is the Director of Cloud Partner Business at T-Systems. He's been particularly active during the pandemic, setting up platforms to connect small and medium-sized businesses with federal funding. And finally, Liam Maxwell. He is Director of Government Transformation at Amazon Web Services, where he helps governments accelerate their modernization programs. Previously, Liam was the UK government's first Chief Technology Officer and served subsequently as National Technology Advisor. In fact, Liam is going to start us off by laying out the scale of the challenge. Then we'll come back and we'll meet our other panelists and have a discussion about what we can learn from the last few months. So Liam, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thanks very much, Vivian. Well, what just happened? We've seen over the last 18 weeks that most of the world has moved into a period of very strong lockdown. And that's meant people have had to go and work from home, learn from home, seek advice from home, do everything from home. Everything's been remote. And if we look at how organizations have reacted to that, we've seen three really big themes come through for it. Number one is speed. People have had to do this at unprecedented speed. Often people have said that governments are slow and it takes ages for a government to move and do something. Well, look again, because you'll have seen that it's been a completely different environment in the last 18 weeks. Governments for everybody. So the scale at which this change has happened has had to be really different. People have had to do things at a much bigger scale, much more quickly. And that's also meant that we've had to look again at how the government looks after our data, how we work with the government, and governments have had to look really strongly at the way that security impacts the things that they do. And they've got to look after people's information because people trust the government to do that. And so there's three components, speed, scale, and security, have made this move to remote a fascinating thing to watch. We've seen those with flexible architectures move fastest. We've seen people being able to spin up a device, change that advice, change the advice, keep on changing it in a series of chatbots and other approaches, which mean that governments can change text and content on the fly. That may sound relatively straightforward, but it's not. That requires the architecture and the connectivity, which only governments that have got modern architectures can use. We've seen them adapt and change and deliver to new user needs at great speed, but also almost seamlessly as people have made these things work. Let's have a look at some examples. In Los Angeles, the Unified Schools Network, in 1 hour, managed to start sending out and connect to its 700,000 students. BSmart and EdTech in Italy enabled 30% of schools to spin up and start teaching remotely using the Chime app. That's remarkably fast. You could not really have thought that anyone could do that quickly in the past. In France, helping BPI, in BPI France, the Paddock company is one of the partners of AWS, managed to change a business approach to help deliver funds to small, medium businesses from its average of 40 a day, that span up to 8,000 a day. In Flanders and in France, the chatbots which health services use have to change the guidance and the recommendations and their modeling on the fly so that they can help citizens understand the latest information as we learn new ways of analyzing disease. And again, disease analysis and the ability to understand what's going on is right at the heart of the changes we're seeing people make and governments make across the world. And no longer are we thinking that great maxim, well, it'd be great to have data-driven policy. What we're seeing today is data-driven policy. We've crossed that Rubicon, and we're now looking at a whole series of changes to government and to the way that we deliver services that is based on the data. So that data analysis and the ability to understand it, the ability to look and see whether something works or doesn't work, which is at the heart of the digital reforms we brought in, are now really becoming commonplace in the heart of the way that people deliver systems. And so we're going to talk quite a lot today about flexibility, about engagement, about speed, and also about the security and how we can keep people's data safe and enable them to have services which flex to meet their user needs. And that, of course, means flexible architecture, which needs to leverage a component that can scale up and down without causing enormous disruption, which will cause delay, and also without causing enormous cost. And that's why we're so excited to talk about cloud in this situation. And I'm sure the colleagues and panelists on this will find that that's a really good topic to discover.
I want to turn now to you, Dr. Shawky. When COVID-19 disrupted the education systems around the world, we saw some educational institutions turn it into an opportunity to innovate. So can you describe how COVID-19 impacted learners in Egypt and what role technology played in your response?
Well, that's a very good question. Let me say, to put things in context, a few observations in the beginning. In Egypt, we have a relatively large education system. We have about 22 million students in the K-12 ecosystem with 1.3 million teachers. So that's a relatively large undertaking. And pre-COVID-19, we were on a very ambitious plan to transform our education system. We are building a new education system before COVID-19 hit. We have covered grades from KG1 until grade 2 in the past 2 years, building from the bottom up, building a totally new system with a new vision, seeking 21st century skills, changing the education paradigm altogether. So we just dismantled the old and building new. But while doing that, we had two major undertakings. One, we built something we call the Egyptian Knowledge Bank, which is probably one of the top 5 largest digital libraries in the world. This has in its content the digital resources from the top publishers around the world. It was seeking K-12 as well as higher education. So we have everything from Springer Nature to Elsevier to Wiley, McGraw-Hill, Britannica, all in one place. What's new about that? It is open for free to 100 million Egyptians. It's open for free nationally. So it was all before the COVID-19. So we had the content in place. We invested in that. And we were building a new system, but also in the meantime, parallel to this, we intervened at the high school level, also prior to COVID-19, by building a completely new IT infrastructure in schools. Every high school had its own servers, its own Wi-Fi, fiber optics, in national education system, and we distributed tablets to every student in grades 10 and 11, walking our way upwards. The purpose of that was to allow every student, rich and poor, to access the resources in the Egyptian Knowledge Bank, the digital library we invested in. We wanted equal opportunity for accessing this high-level material, but also wanted to do the exams electronically. So we invested a lot in having our exams served in the cloud and pushed to the devices, and tried that in 2018, 2019. Schools were suspended in Egypt mid-March, 15th of March. And as Liam said, we were hit with something we never expected, and we had to scramble to make sure no child is left behind here. We refused to cut the school year short, and go home and just enough is enough. We wanted to continue the study, have them go through it and be assessed one way or another. We were able, within 4 days, I'm serious, 4 days, on March 19, we extracted from our EKB, the Egyptian Knowledge Bank, all the K-12 curricula, reassembled it quickly in a separate portal hosted on the cloud called study.ekb.eg. Now that was a huge undertaking. We put together curricula, digital learning objects from KG1 to grade 12 in one place in Arabic and English, and it was open to the students with even no login. You just walk through 4 days later, because we knew they want to study from home. They were very worried about instruction and how to communicate with the teacher and what the parents would do. So actually, within 10 more days before the end of March, we were able to install a simple but very useful learning management system, call it social learning, on 50,000 schools. So we had 2.5 million virtual classrooms up and running, and had students, 15 million of them, registering on that new system, 1.3 million teachers, and actually 1 million parents. Those virtual classrooms were a digital copy of the physical classroom, same students, same teacher. So a student would go to their device and find their classes in geography and history and math and science with same colleagues, same teacher. Over this new platform, we were able to push down information, study plans, help the teachers. We had virtual classrooms for training teachers. So the audience of a certain virtual classes were teachers. Other virtual classes were done for parents. And ironically, we were able to reach Egyptians studying abroad. We have our kids in over 100 countries. So we created virtual classes for them. We used to do that with the diplomatic pouch before March 15. So we were actually leapfrogging into something that wasn't even conceivable. So after March 15, we had a new digital library in place. We have virtual classes and a whole new learning management system across the country. And then we decided quickly to change the assessment. We wanted them to continue studying, but be assessed. Kids grades 3 and above have to go through formal assessment. And we changed the assessment into project-based learning and decided, instead of having them come out of home, they have to do projects at home. And we centrally published and pushed those projects, multidisciplinary projects also, not subject-based projects, to grades 3 to 9. Grades 3 to 9 in Egypt has 15 million students. Those are the members of the platform we established. We helped them through, and believe it or not, they delivered. They were able, actually the first time they learned about research, because what we did is say, instead of the memorization type exam they were used to, we said, go and do a paper, a research project from grade 3 upwards. And you can do it with colleagues, like teamwork, like up to 5 people sharing that over the net without going out of home. And Imagine young kids now are learning the language of research, going to our digital library, searching for content. They never did that before. They were using their printed school book. So all of a sudden, they explored the wealth of the digital resources that were there before COVID-19, and they were ignoring it because they were doing what is only sufficient for the exam.
Steve, I'm gonna turn it over to you now. You're with Capgemini, of course, and Capgemini is helping to implement a quarantine and contact tracing solution to contain and monitor the spread of the virus in the Czech Republic and Slovakia. And you built it in collaborative process with citizens. So tell us about that.
Well, I think actually, just to be full disclosure here, what happened was when it all sort of started, we wanted to find who knew how to do this the best. So we were in learning mode, and actually we reached out to a company in the Czech Republic called Kabula, who are a Capgemini partner, and they were working as a bunch of citizens in the Czech Republic, rolling out the Czech Republic's response. So really it was about learning, and it was about understanding what they'd done and how they'd done it and the pieces. And I think a really key area at that stage was the fact that when you look to the point that Liam said earlier about collaboration, is there's no playbook for a global pandemic. There's no, certainly from an IT response perspective, there was nothing that any of us have experienced like this. So learning, what does it mean to do contact tracing, understanding when or where mobile works, what does it mean from an epidemiology perspective for what's the accuracy you need on some of those pieces, and understanding, because this is the first time ever anybody's had a pandemic where data has been central to how we handle it. So really what we did there is we spoke to Pavel and the guys at Kabula, we worked with them understanding it, and then we really looked at how we can take those learnings and start applying them elsewhere in the world. So obviously Capgemini, we're a big global company, and it was about, okay, so we've learned this from the guys in the Czech Republic. How do we take those learnings? How do we understand how they managed to do it? And if you know how your curves work, the Czech Republic's done extremely well in responding. And understanding, therefore, what we can do to help other governments based on those learnings. So it was all about this fact that, there's nothing that's really important at the start of this to be humble. There was nobody who could say, I'll tell you what, I've done this 50 times before. Nobody had done this once before. So actually what we were doing is we went out there, spoke to the folks in the Czech Republic, spoke to guys in France, in the UK, in Germany, and in a lot of countries. And I think really what we learned was that the importance of data, the importance of transparency of communication to citizens, the importance of using information to drive policy is ultimately what's going to get us out of this. How we control the fine grain to educate people, to make them understand why rules are in place and the impact of not following those rules sort of becomes very, very critical. And it's all down to this piece of data. Processes and contact tracing and track and trace are incredibly important. But without the visibility of data, without communicating back to citizens, without being able to educate people in terms of the impact, because I think one thing that we've learned through this since doing that initial piece with the Czech Republic is because there isn't an immediacy in the virus, it's not like you do something today and something happens tomorrow. It's you do something today and 2 to 3 weeks later, you see the impact of it. So that was, I think, the piece where, working with Kabula, working with the guys who were rolling out the Czech Republic system and then applying that knowledge internally. We're a company of 270,000 people in a whole bunch of countries. So it was about having a group internally at Capgemini who would share those learnings. And what did we then do to speak to other governments around it, and also the interchange between companies and governments. And as companies get back to work, what do organizations and companies need to be able to get their employees back to work safely? And as you say, talking about governments working remotely, is governments are also employers. So how do they get their people back to work safely and securely when you're talking massive scale employers and a massive problem of sort of a distributed workforce? So really at the start of all of this, and the reason we sort of really went deep and hard with the guys in the Czech Republic was we thought they did something very, very smart. was that they really focused on data, they really focused on transparency, and they really focused on the fine-grained policy of how you manage this sort of outbreak. And I think if we look at how the impact of that on the curves, it's really played out that at the end of the day, using data to drive policy and to monitor policy is how we're going to solve this, not just as governments, but as companies as well. It's going to be the sort of thing that we need to think about moving forwards, is how do we monitor and track our employees? How do we monitor and track citizens? And how do we do that transparently in a way that makes them buy into the process that we have?
Right. That trust with the citizenry is so critical, and access to that data and the transparency around how that data is being used. That's fascinating. Again, the focus on collaboration. So you've seen the lessons learned from the contact tracing applications in the Czech Republic. Have those then been implemented in other countries around the world?
Yes, and I really wish I could say the names of them. But I mean, that's part of the stuff in terms of the wonder of contracts. But yes, so we've taken those learnings and those understandings. We did a big sort of campaign and education tour, and part of it was really just an education piece for Capgemini. It wasn't just about use this solution and doing that. It was sharing the learnings to governments and state governments over here in the US. It was explaining how things could be done better and learning from people, because every single conversation you have, you learn something else as well. Because well, actually, we've thought about this problem. So wow, and particularly, I'd say in the first 6 weeks, there was a huge amount of iteration. I think people are beginning to get some of the hang of it now, which is really good. But it was all about this need to communicate. And we really felt from a Capgemini perspective is our responsibility was, is we can communicate across governments and across boundaries within these things probably easier than most, because we can actually have somebody in our French organization speak to me from a North America perspective, speak to Sergey who's in the Netherlands, speak to Lee or whatever who's in the UK, and you can pull that together very, very fast, a cross-country collaboration. So it was about taking the learnings and then applying them and industrializing them and communicating them in a way that helped people to think differently about the problem they were solving.
Yeah. So technology combined with really culture change is what we're talking about inside organizations and in societies. Thank you. I want to turn now to you, Ralph. So T Systems helped orchestrate a huge public platform for small and medium-sized businesses in Germany that enabled them to apply for financial relief and have those applications administered and processed. You got this set up incredibly quickly to allow those businesses to be able to get financial relief sometimes in the matter of days. So what was that journey like? I can only imagine.
It was a really impressive experience even for ourselves. So the public sector in Germany has responded to effects of COVID-19 with a comprehensive aid programs at federal and state level. This include emergency aid, liquidity assistance, guarantees, and tax relief. And due to the crisis, many small and medium-sized enterprises in Germany are dependent on rapid payment of subsidies today. And to achieve this, new short routes must be created to speed up application and the related payment. So what has happened a couple of weeks ago is during the final load tests by the customers, the developers, by the way, on the weekend before the official go live date, it became apparent that the planned local operating platform would not be able to withstand the expected rush of requests. So the customer gave us a call, I guess it has been on a Friday late afternoon, and asked us for support evaluating a suitable solution for operation of the service, which then had to be found in a record time. I agree what you say, because the go live date is on the Monday, on the next Monday after this weekend. And the aim is to enable the existing data center capabilities to be expanded to meet the expected requirements. From the very first moment on, it was apparent, it was obvious that only a public cloud operating platform could meet the requirements for scalability and deployment at short notice. And together with systems as a multi-cloud provider, the customer then investigated the existing possibilities. So what we have done over the weekend, we have evaluated several cloud solutions which came into question. And a lot of them were ruled out due to insufficient performance or lack of internet bandwidth. And ultimately, the decision was made in favor of the VMware Cloud on AWS. And we guess there have been 3 specific things we have put together to make this happen for the end customer. Number 1 is with VMware Systems was able to deliver the appropriate technology stack. We have provided a full software-defined data center, including storage and network virtualization. And we guess it optimally suited to the application and the in-house platform of the end customer. Number 2 is besides the underlying, and by the way, dedicated AWS infrastructure guarantees data residency in Frankfurt in Germany, which is quite important for a federal customer in Germany, and enables a really reliable and highly available internet breakout, which is a key requirement to ensure that all requests, even on peak on demands, are served at the end of the day. And we guess overall, the systems operates the platform and provides it as a managed service to our end customer. So the idea has been from the beginning on, let's put some technical capabilities together, let's bring them to a related managed service, and bring some technical expertise in the meaning of a customer success management team to this project. And the customer benefit has been proven on the Monday afterwards then, because the importance of the scaling solution from the cloud is simply demonstrated by the visitor numbers even today. While the load tests of the end customers were designed for 500, I guess what it has been 500 simultaneous users. On Monday, 7,000 users attempted to use the service at the same time. And in the following period, the number of users rose into the 5-digit range, and the trend is still rising, and everything works quite well. And we guess that has been an impressive customer individual solution approach, bringing some things together properly other has not mentioned before, VMware and AWS capabilities combined under a managed service approach of a multi-service, multi-cloud provider like the systems.
Yeah. I mean, what's so astounding about that is in any case, that kind of speed of providing that service, that capability to be able to carry that load would be remarkable. But of course, all of you at T-Systems and your clients are also working remotely. So you don't even have the benefit of a shared workspace. So that must have added an extra layer of complexity, no doubt.
Yeah. But I guess at the other side, this specific situation caused an advantage. Yeah, we have started to thinking the opposite way. So normally you are sitting in the office and you are not really thinking about how to improve things you do for a longer time in the same matter. And working at home has to do with, you are right, remote first, but our understanding is more remote first means customer first as well, right? Because the customer is more or less sitting in the same situation as his service provider, and we are simply interested in providing emergency deployment or business continuity solutions as we would sitting, for example, in our own offices. And this kind of, let's name it, agile collaboration approach is something we have really enforced in the last couple of weeks and months. And I guess that is one of the key success criteria providing our customers through this age of COVID-19.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask all of you now to just, we're beginning to come to the towards the end of our session, but I do want to ask you all a few questions. I'm going to ask you to look into a crystal ball for a minute and tell me, based on your experience and what you've seen, what will the workplace look like? How remote will the workplace be in 1 year or 5 years from now? Do you think do you think we will ever go back to what we considered normal before? Dr. Shockey, I'll start with you.
Well, I remember that our Prime Minister, shortly after the suspension of schools, made an administrative decision to really limit the number of government employees in the workplace. And we are working with like 10% staffing in-house. The rest are home or working from home. And that has, you know, as everyone knows, the world after COVID-19, even if a vaccine is created, is not going to go back to where it was. I think we learned a lot. We learned a lot about our efficiency or lack of it, and how many staff members do we really need to have here in the physical place, with or without COVID-19, and the number of teachers, and what we can do remotely and what we can do in class. And so there are lots of lessons learned. But if I may, you mentioned the word collaboration many times, and many of my colleagues here mentioned it. And and I mentioned in passing that we were able to test our kids abroad, although we can't reach each other, but with technology. And funny enough, we were asked by a UNESCO office in Central Africa to help them with our electronic exams, to make the final exam in the Cameroon using the technology we have. And the ability to do so is really stunning, which opens the door for very creative ideas for the future. We might think even of multi-nationality schools. I mean, there is nothing that prevents a British child from attending school in the States, or an Egyptian student to attend, because that's exactly what they do today. And you can have exams with different nationalities in class right now, or we can have one teacher in Germany teaching to kids in different countries. That should be very straightforward. We couldn't have discussed it before COVID-19, but I think now it's a piece of cake with technology. But when we talk about respect for the other and diversity and all those nice things, we can actually practice them with kids if we introduce them to other cultures and other parts of the world using technology. And there is a big appetite for that. And I think education could be an international endeavor rather than everyone is doing his own thing. We can now think of international curricula or exams or whatever. It is really, I think, a revolution in education that be accredited to COVID-19.
Yeah. So it sounds like remote working, or in your case, remote learning is here to stay. I'm gonna change up the question a little bit for our other panelists. Ralph, what would you say is the most surprising thing from the last 3 months that you've experienced?
I guess there have been two things. The one is related to our daily work, and the second is related to a specific customer feedback, which has been, by the way, coming from the customer I have explained previously. A couple of days later within the project, the customer gave us a call. It has been a specific guy who's responsible for doing application performance tests. And he has not been aware that we have changed the technology and the operating model, the platform model below over the weekend. And he has just recognized a couple of days later that the performance has been raised up by 400%, and then wants to know what has happened over the weekend. That was really a cool call, and that is not a marketing story, that's really daily business. And the second is coming from the daily work, more or less working remotely. We have really shown, and that was interesting to see, usually we think business has to do with noses. Yeah? Working together in a personal matter is something we all love, and I guess we all prefer. But at the same time, in this very challenging times in the age of Corona, we have proven that we can even raise efficiency and productiveness if we are working from home. And that is something which has really surprised me. So we learn every day, we learn every week, and we learn every month, and that is something I will continue to like on.
Yeah. The capacity for humans to adapt and adapt quickly has been
Exactly.
certainly a big surprise, a pleasant, positive surprise for all of us. Steve, is there any inspiration on that? I'll continue on the same note. Is there any inspiration we can take away from what we've experienced these recent months?
Well, absolutely. I think the first one is the speed that things happened. I mean, the ability to react, the pace that people did it, and the ability to drive that change, I think, is the core of the first piece. I think the second thing, I think, from inspiration, I would say is the importance of data. Everybody always talks about it, and to be honest, everybody talks about buzzwords, data's the new oil, and all of those sort of nonsense phrases. The reality is actually we're seeing what it means to be data driven. We're literally writ large across the planet where things are data driven and where things aren't data driven. And I think part of the sort of inspiration is to think that it will help people to realize the importance of understanding reality based on data, to have that digital view. And I think the sort of the third thing I'd say from an inspirational perspective is what it's made employers, government employers, and employers generally think about their people and the engagement with their people in a different way. Is I think a real inspiration when we talk about going back to what goes after is you're not going to see everybody go back to offices. You're not going to see those things. But that means we've got to think about people differently. I mean, I think Dr. Schalke said brilliantly about how we could teach globally. With kids, you've got to think about engagement. Are the kids engaged in the class? If you're remote, it's different than if the teacher's at the front and you can shout at them. And I speak to the children, the child who was regularly shouted at by a teacher. And I think when we look at employers as well, that need for engagement, to understand how people are engaged, that's one of the things I think has been a big inspiration for us as we've looked at Capgemini with all of our people and working with some sort of the government organizations is, how do you keep people motivated? How do you keep people engaged? How do you notice when somebody's tailing off a bit, when they're not in the office, when you can't just go and grab a quick coffee with them? So I think for me, the biggest inspiration is I think the data is going to be hugely important, but that connection of what it means to engage, we're going to have to invest in this new remote working being part of it, of what it means to keep people connected, whether that be in education, whether that be in government, whether that be in companies. Distributed working requires us to think about engagement with the individuals. And I think that to me is the greatest inspiration here is the social events that have been created virtually throughout all of this crisis are some of the most fantastic things, because we're all working the weekends, we're all working these pieces. But doing a beer, if somebody had told me 6 months ago I would enjoy doing a Friday night beer on a video camera, I would have not believed them at all. Right? That's the polite way of putting it. Now we think about engagement in a different way, and I think that to me is the greatest inspiration. Is it's changing the way we think about engagement because we're now thinking about us fundamentally being distributed.
Liam, I'll leave this final question for you. It's a pretty open-ended one. Where do we go from here?
So I think one of the great opportunities we have now is to what COVID's done for us is enabled us to see the way that we work and the processes we use in a different light. And what's the opportunity now is that disintermediation of all processes of government mean that we can start to take the administration and simplify and rationalize it, and actually start to spend a lot more money and time and effort on the Steve goes engagement, but actually the valuable face-to-face engagement that we have with citizens. And I think that's going to be one of the big changes that we go through is the design of what we do and the design of the services we provide will be based much more strongly on feedback, will be based more strongly on the results that we see from whether they work or not. That's now becoming a core part of the way we design things. And it will mean, I hope, that we will stop spending money on administration and start spending money on service delivery and really focusing on that in a human and engaged way. The great example we use, it's about 5 years old now, Buurtzorg in the Netherlands, where they changed the way of dealing with patients in social care so that they spend more face time with the same people over and over again. Really focusing on that engagement is absolutely the heart of what new public services will look like, because this change, this crisis has shown us that really what's important, and what's important is to contact and deliver services for your citizens, and get the admin to be something which is simple, effective, clear, using shared components, using common components, but something that's clearly administration and focus on the delivery of the service. And being remote just exemplifies that and just makes that much, much, much clearer. And so that's my hope for that. And also, I think a real understanding of the skills we need. And it's been really amazing to hear what's happened in Egypt. We're really, really stunned with the numbers and the speed and the capability that that's delivered, which, let's be honest, I look around the world, that puts most countries around the world to shame for what they've done for their education processes at that point. That speed, that scale, it's not happening where I live. And I think it's really interesting to see that. It's the people that have thought about this that are going to come out ahead.
Steve Jones, Dr. Tarek Shawky, Rafe Pogomon, and Liam Maxwell, I want to just thank you, and I want to thank AWS so much for for hosting this session. And we'll be watching and see your continued success and sharing of lessons learned around the world. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks.